The story began in 1995. There was a psychopathic doctor who had dreamed to make important medical discoveries. In his opinion, the brain is the most fascinating part of the human body, that he believes by controlling the nerve system in this organ, he can rule life like a god. In order to fulfill this ambition, he murdered people for the experiments. He was known as the headhunter because he always targeted the victim's head. However, his identity was never revealed because he committed his crime with meticulous calculation. The public became enraged and terrified as they faced the terror of the headhunter despite the government's best efforts to find a solution. Meanwhile, Professor Daniel was successful in identifying a psychopathic gene. With the help of this gene, he was able to create a mechanism for the government to detect psychopathic seeds as early as in the womb, in the hope that the method could be used to predict the birth of psychopathic serial killers in the future. The test claimed to have an accuracy rate up to 99%, with the remaining 1% as a genius's gene, which means that out of 10 genes, only one had the potential to be genius because the two genes were identical. The government wanted every fetus to be examined, and if it was declared to have a psychopathic gene, the fetus must be terminated immediately. However, the plan violated human rights, and the president ultimately rejected the bill. One day, the headhunter attacked a family in the middle of the night on his way home since he needed to finish his research immediately. The parents died, but their youngest son was unharmed while their older son was severely injured. However, the children managed to escape the murder. During an investigation, the youngest son unintentionally encountered the headhunter's picture in the hospital where his brother was receiving treatment, and the headhunter was eventually apprehended. June, the headhunter's wife, was devastated when she discovered the truth about her husband. She, who is pregnant, went to Professor Lee to have the fetus examined. Her pain was compounded by the discovery that her son inherited a psychopathic gene. June wasn't the only one who took the test at the time. Another woman was also found to have a fetus with a psychopathic gene, but she believed that her late husband's good character would prevent her child from becoming a bad person. June, on the other hand, has lost her hope considering her husband is a serial killer. 25 years later, citizens begin to forget the dark tragedy that occurred in the past, but the peace is broken when the serial killer terrorizes the residents again and shocks the public. His actions reopen old wounds where the killer was identified as a psychopath. It raised big questions about whether he is a descendant of the headhunter. Detective Moochi is working hard to solve the case. During the investigation, he met a reporter named Hongju who wanted to be a part of it in order to gather information for her TV show, Sherlock Hongju, which she hosts. Moochi and Hongju eventually worked together to find the murderer. In the past, Moochi was the youngest child whose parents were murdered by the headhunter. He was the eyewitness who led to the killer's eventual capture. The old wounds were reopened when serial killer once again haunted the community, and it grew into ambition for revenge. Moochi vows to track down the headhunter's son and kill the headhunter in front of him. Moochi wants headhunter's son to feel the same way he did the last time because he believes it was a fair and appropriate punishment for the headhunter. Moochi's brother, however, who has since become a pastor, has discovered a deep sense of peace as a result of forgiving headhunter for his earlier deeds, but this attitude appears to go against his younger brother's wishes, who is still upset about what happened. Their differences create distance, make their relationship disharmonious. Along with Moochi, Hongju also harbors animosity for the headhunter. In the past, the psychopath kidnapped her and her brother. Hongju managed to survive while her brother didn't. Hongju, who felt extremely guilty about what had transpired, made the decision to live alone since she felt she didn't deserve to have a happy life with his parents. She maintained that mindset throughout her life and never revealed it to anybody, not even her detective father, who assumed she had died along with her brother. Just like Moochi, Hongju also wants to take revenge on the headhunter. Time passed and the victims continued to fall. Moochi continued to investigate the case, and he concluded that the perpetrator was a psychopath who despised God. This is proven by the fact that he always leaves traces to ridicule God, starting from killing the victim close to the church, carving a cross on the victim's body, or lay a middle finger of the victim to the cross direction. In critical times like that, a kind police officer, Jung Ba-rum, tries to do his best to serve the community. Ba-rum is an innocent young man who is very caring towards others. He is very humble and also good at socializing. In his neighborhood, he is quite close to a grandmother. He always takes the time to help the grandmother whenever and wherever he can. His kindness encourages the grandmother to match up Ba-rum with her only granddaughter, Bong-yi. She always believed that Ba-rum is a suitable man for her granddaughter. Despite the fact that she has a crush on Ba-rum, Bong-yi never shows any interest when her grandmother brings up this topic. She just shy to admit it. On the other hand, Ba-rum always treats Bong-yi with more care and attention than anyone else, which makes Bong-yi melt every time. However, Ba-rum only sees Bong-yi as his younger sister and tells her as such when she expresses her feelings, which causes Bong-yi to feel rejected. Throughout her life, Bong-yi had a severe trauma that prevented her from crossing the bridge when it was raining. In the past, when it was pouring outside, Bong-yi was harassed by a man under the bridge when it was raining heavily in her area. Detective Moochi managed to capture the man and put him in jail, but the bad memories lingered. Bong-yi would never forget it. Even today, her grandmother still feels bad for not being able to protect her granddaughter at the time. Instead, she always tries to take care of Bong-yi as best as possible. One day, Ba-rum has to accept the harsh reality when his close friend, Chi-kook, is mysteriously bad injured. His condition is critical and he is rushed to the hospital. Theoretically, it related to a serial murder case that is being investigated by Detective Moochi. As a friend of the victim, Ba-rum decided to help investigate the case, and since then he started to get close to Moochi. Professor Lee knows that the predator is most likely the headhunter's son because he tested his DNA the last time, but he still needs to prove it himself because it could be that the headhunter's son has the genius gene instead of the psychopath gene. In order to analyze the matter, Professor Lee visited headhunter's wife. It turns out that the son works at the hospital, but somehow Professor Lee felt the mother's behavior was quite suspicious, as if she tried to cover up something. In the end, Professor Lee visited the hospital to see firsthand how Johann lived his life as a doctor. Johann appears to be a cold and fearless man, which was demonstrated when he faced thugs who rebelled in panic after learning that his friend was injured. Johann didn't hesitate to raise a knife and said that he was an expert in using the tool. Professor Lee found it sufficient to establish Johann's psychopath tendencies, but he's still unable to determine whether Johann was the one who committed the crime. One day, Bong-yi's grandmother earns a living by working as a cleaning service. She accidentally works at Johann's house and everything seems fine, but when Johann leaves the house, the grandmother finds a basement that is quite suspicious. It turns out there are many photos of the victims of the recent murders. This is when the grandmother realizes that Johann, her employer, is a serial killer. She went away in a panic when Johann returned to his house, but she managed to leave the house while carrying a photo of evidence. Johann eventually finds out after a while and he tried to chase her. On the way home, the grandmother, who still in panic, called Ba-rum to get help, but it was too late for him to answer. Nonetheless, Ba-rum tracked down the grandmother. She was already dead when he found her. However, there was a figure next to her who is actually Johann. When Ba-rum chasing Johann's figure, he had an accident and Johann managed to escape with his identity not being revealed. Bong-yi was devastated to find out that her grandmother had passed away. She regretted ever blaming her grandmother for her prior misfortunes. But even in her lowest state, Ba-rum always by her side. It gave Bong-yi hope that she could get through this struggle with his support. One by one, the puzzle pieces are starting to accumulate. As a detective, Moochi trying to use his deduction skills to combine observation with logic. After he made a conclusion, he arranges a press conference. Moochi tried to answer every media questions regarding the case he worked on. It appeared that the grandmother's case was also linked to the serial killer, and he is currently investigating the real motive of the predator. At the end of the press conference, Moochi was mysteriously called by the predator, who said in a disguised voice that he had kidnapped a child and that he does not pick victims at random. If Moochi can figure out the reasons, the child will be released, but if he can't, the hostage will die. The predator requests that Moochi should give the answer on the TV show Sherlock Hongju. To save the child, Moochi accepts the challenge, and he forms a team with Ba-rum, Hongju and one other detective in Ba-rum's house as their headquarters. They began intensive research to solve the riddles. Time passed, and they eventually found the answer. Moochi concludes that each victim is linked to the fairy tale of the 7 great sins, which include pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. Moochi is aware that the predator is a person who despises God and regards people who do not commit sins as sinners. In short, the predator selects victims who do not commit a sin, with the exception of Bong-yi's grandmother, whose death was unexpected at the time. While the child held hostage by the predator represents the sin of anger. The reason why predator chose the child as a victim because the child lacks of anger, but this is incorrect because the victim who represents the sin of anger is actually Moochi's brother, Go-moo-won. Go-moo-won once appeared on a TV show and said that he is no longer angry with Headhunter and that he has forgiven his actions. When the VCR is shown, it appears that the predator has caught Moo-won, and everyone who watches the show is surprised that the predator has planned this game specifically for Moochi because he was disturbed by him. Moochi, who doesn't know anything, starts to panic. He begged the predator to stop his cruel actions, but the psychopath doesn't want to hear. When the show is running out, Moo-won die in the live broadcast. Bong-yi, who was watching Sherlock Hongju, heard the confession of the predator who killed her grandmother, and when the VCR was shown, she realized that the predator was in a church she had previously visited. Enraged, Bong-yi took a knife and went to the church without informing the police. When she arrived, she encountered the predator and fought as hard as she could. She eventually loses track of the perpetrator, but she managed to injure his left hand, which she told Ba-rum in the hope that this clue could be used to catch the killer. Moochi gave up everything after his brother was killed, but when Go-Moo-won appeared in the form of his imagination and told him not to give up, Moochi realized that wallowing in sadness wouldn't change anything. Moochi eventually got up and went back to work on his investigation. On the other hand, Professor Lee contacted Johann a few days after learning about the murder of Bong-yi's grandmother to determine whether he was the perpetrator. However, after agreeing to meet him, the professor was attacked and declared missing. The puzzle pieces gradually began to fit together, eventually leading to Johann. In the end, Moochi is convinced that Johann is the perpetrator, but he is unable to apprehend him yet because he still needs concrete evidence. Meanwhile, Bong-yi's wound hasn't healed. Ba-rum brought her home so he can better care for her. Soon after, he received word from Moochi that Dr. Johann was the suspect in the death of Bong-yi's grandmother. Ba-rum broke into Johann's house to look for him, but to no avail. He went to the basement and discovered many of his photos. It turned out Johann has been eyeing him all this time. The situation is getting more precarious when Johann secretly goes to Ba-rum's house with Bong-yi, who is in the house. Bong-yi, upon discovering his existence, becomes terrified. Ba-rum arrives just in time, taking Bong-yi out of the house and instructing her to find a safe place outside to wait on him because he will catch Johann with his own hand. Bong-yi flees in panic. She meets Moochi, who rushes to Ba-rum's house to help. Unfortunately, Ba-rum has fallen and Johann continues to attack him brutally, forcing Moochi to draw his gun and shoot Johann. Both men are in critical condition. They were taken to the hospital and Johann declared dead. On the other hand, Ba-rum's brain surgery was successful, but he suffered from amnesia, which caused him to forget his past, including people close to him. Because of this, Bong-yi was heartbroken. Before this incident, she finally knew that Ba-rum was willing to marry her when she graduated from high school, but she had to bury that hope because Ba-rum had completely forgotten about it. In the end, Bong-yi had to live alone because Ba-rum had been transferred to another area.